in West Kitsilano. And I'm asking you to please vote against these motions before you today relating to this item. They are premature, putting the cart before the horse. And this is not just about transit. We know that the choice of transit is going to determine far more than that. It's going to determine the whole form of at least the west side of the city and probably the whole city. And we have a new city plan that you have all said you want to be collaborative about with residents of the city. We need to decide on that first and decide what kind of city do we want. Then we can decide on the kind of transit that will support the city that we want. We shouldn't be choosing one transit option first and then having that govern the type of city that we're going to build. And this is definitely not the kind of decision that should be made in one day and in a rush like this. And I also totally disagree with the idea that if you don't pass this today, that somehow, nothing will ever happen again. What you can easily do in your motion is say, we want to look at alternatives. This is one alternative we're going to look at. We're also going to look at light rail. We're going to look at all the different options and make sure that we pick the one that helps us build the kind of city that we want to have. And good public policy needs to have a foundation of good process and good information. And we don't have either of those here today. There are so many unknowns, so many questions, so much of the information that's been given out in this report is disputed by all sorts of experts. Just for example, the cost of the LRT line. Lots of people say this is so exaggerated and you need to do your due diligence and make sure that the numbers you are using in your decision are the right numbers and reasonable numbers. Another thing is the greenhouse gas emissions from just building this line. They never talk about that. That much concrete and that much excavation and work going to UBC is a huge generator of greenhouse gas emissions just in and of itself. Then the other issue that they have is they keep talking about how many people are out at UBC. But when I looked at the map showing where those people live, a lot of those people live in Vancouver. And they're not going to travel down to Broadway to go 2 stations out to UBC. This single line is only going to serve a small number of those people that are trying to get right across the whole city. There's all sorts of people inside the city that would be much better served by more LRT lines like along 41st, where they could be far more likely to use it. And the report actually even says that there will be more transit use overall for quite a few years, many years. So, I asked these questions. So, is this really all about UBC and the other landowners trying to get a big public subsidy to allow them to develop even higher densities than they currently have planned? And then we look at the online survey. The online survey isn't even necessarily Vancouver residents, and we know that it was heavily promoted by a group of students at UBC. So we can't even trust those numbers. So during the election and shortly after, it seemed that you wanted to change the way things are being done in the city, that you wanted to support the idea of working cooperatively with the people of the city and neighborhoods to determine the kind of city we want to live in. And people voted for that kind of change and approach. And if you endorse this today, only a few months into your mandate, it just basically makes all those words and principles that you said you believed in meaningless. It just feels like we're in a deja vu moment where we're just back to business as usual. These reports get landed down, we have a day to decide, nobody even knows they're going on, and decisions made, and you move on. So these are wonderful neighborhoods that you're talking about. West Kitsilano is famous across the city. People love it. And we love our West Broadway shopping district. The whole type of development that happens once we choose SkyTrain and the stations is that all of that will be basically rezoned. We've seen what happens in Canby Corridor. We know we have Oak Ridge malls. We know we have metro towns out in Burnaby. Is this really the kind of thing we want to be seen to be endorsing right now? So I believe that this is just a fabricated deadline that's been just created in the last few weeks. And a lot of it seems to be that it's all about trying to get money.
Excuse me, just 1 second. Point of order. Go ahead, Councillor DeGenova. Just a second, let me.
I'm concerned that we received a staff presentation from our staff this morning, and that there are words that are being used in the speaker's presentation that perhaps are inappropriate, considering the fact that the staff have given us a presentation with some timelines, and I would caution speakers, through you, if you could please caution speakers not to in any way make accusations of our staff.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Actually, if you, excuse me, I'm speaking. That if you could please refrain from, this is a parliamentary situation in terms of using parliamentary language. Words like fabrication around issues, or not being able to trust, or exaggeration of information, not being able to trust information, are inappropriate in terms of what they impugn in terms of staff. So if you could.
How am I to give my point of view then?
Well, just present your point of view in terms of the concerns you have, but do not, do not in any way denigrate the work done by staff.
I wasn't denigrating the work done by staff when I used the term fabricated. I'm talking about the idea that we went to the Mayor's Council, we've gone to the federal government, we're saying we have to decide now, today, or all of this will never happen, we'll never have transit to UBC, and that these things are phased. They take years and years to go through these things. And there will be a second phase of funding. The federal government will have another election. It's not that we have to decide right at this very moment. And it's also, what I was trying to say is that the idea that it's SkyTrain or nothing, it doesn't have, I don't believe it has to be. It can be SkyTrain or another option of rail transit. And we can look at costs. And I don't know what I should say in terms of saying that I think there are other experts who have different numbers. I don't see that's non-parliamentary. Anyway.
You have about 15 seconds left.
Yes, but her question, that was a response to a question?
No,
so it's not part of my time.
No, it is part of your, yeah.
Anyway, well, this council really is something else. I'm very surprised. So Vancouver is only going to get so much money from the federal government. Affordable housing is our biggest issue and our biggest crisis. When we go to them now and ask for money for transit, and we start with a new thing when we just got money for transit, we're not going to get as much money for affordable housing from either the federal or the provincial government. So I just want you to consider that and where our focus should be.